Guys, today we're going to be going over how to get the exotic catalyst for week 2 for our exotic mission Encore. Now, for those not familiar with this exotic, we've done a review on it. It's a very, very good weapon. And yes, it is getting an ammo reserve nerf, but it was confirmed to me that it's going to be somewhere around 300 with the reserve mod on. So it's still going to be very, very good. With that being said though, let's go over this week's secrets, the puzzles that are required, how to get the intrinsic for week 2, as well as the exotic catalyst Destabilizing Rounds. We'll also touch at the end of this video on this version of Choir 1, how it compared to last week's version, and of course, what's to come next week. Now to begin this week, we're going to assume that you've already done last week's steps. If you haven't, feel free to check out our other guide. But essentially here, you're just going to jump straight back into the mission. TLDR, just follow the weekly story. One of this week's quests will take us back into Encore. The quest for this week will simply require us to complete a lost sector on Europa, and then hopping over to the Exo Lab and interacting with one of Failsafe's signals. After that, you'll need to then defeat a boss within the exotic mission. Now at this point, it's also a good idea to head on over to Banshee in the Tower. This is where you can actually pick up the second catalyst quest, and that way you can knock out 2 in 1 in this next step. Now interestingly enough about this quest is that it's retroactive. As you can see here, it already had the expert completion part of the quest checked off and completely done. All I had to do was open the second secret chest, and that also works retroactively. You see, if you go through the mission and you pick up that chest before you get this quest, picking up the quest will auto-complete it, which takes us to the mission at hand. You can literally launch it at normal difficulty since you've already likely done this mission on expert from last week. So just doing it on normal, guys, it's a lot easier. To begin the process of unlocking our second intrinsic and our catalyst, progress through the mission like you normally would until you reach the nexus that was unlocked by last week's specimen quest. This is the same area we used to get both of our upgrades last week. Now you complete the same initial puzzle of shooting the boxes in the order that the smaller white box appears in, and this will activate the nexus, and we'll be using the same conflux and portals that we used last week. Now after doing this, you're going to continue through the mission to that first conflux. Now before we skip there, I do think it's worth noting that the mission itself is changing ever so slightly. When in the escape portion of the first puzzle, there are new obstacles. There's Vex lasers, as well as the seeking projectiles that spawn from these red boxes. And among these changes, there was also a Cyclops that was added to the main boss room. The variations are small here, so we may have actually missed a few. But if you notice anything new as you run through the mission this week, definitely let us know in the comments below. It's pretty interesting though, considering that we didn't even have an update today go through, just some background maintenance, yet we're having changes occur here throughout this mission. Now back to upgrading Choir of 1. The first conflux and portal is the same as last week, which is located at the first seismic hammer and just before you're introduced to the blue buff. Now activating the conflux will activate the portal, and now there are 2 other portals active on the inside. Now last week we could go through the one on our left, but now we can go straight ahead into the newly activated one. Now through here, you're going to be greeted by a big immune Vex in a circular room very similar to the secret puzzles from last week that had the room with the destructible pods and connecting portals. Now with this puzzle, we're going to be doing much of the same. You'll look around the room until you find the white indicator box, which is going to be floating in front of one of the Vex walls. You'll use the blue buff that you get from killing this Minotaur to activate a portal that will connect to the Vex wall with that white indicator. You can literally see the string here, guys. Now once inside, there will be 3 destroyable Vex boxes. Make sure you shoot the correct one with the light on it. You'll literally see the white box. I know, this one actually took me a while because it kind of like blends in. So just stop, look at them, and find the one with the white box. Now, when you destroy the right box, the boss will now become damageable, and you'll actually have to knock down 1/3 of its health. And when you reach its health gates, you'll essentially need to repeat this process again. So essentially, guys, just do this 3 times. Upon doing so and killing the boss, you will then spawn a chest. This is where you're going to get the Command Frame 3 Intrinsic. Now next to it will also be this white cube. Guys, make sure you interact with this as you'll be given the specimen quest NES 008. It's very, very important if you're trying to focus farm the trace rifle, the machine gun, and Marty. We'll go over everything on how to complete NES 008 in just a moment. But back to the exotic catalyst. Now you need to return through the portals that you used to enter this area and continue to progress through the mission until you reach the next conflux of the room just before the boss. Now once you've activated this conflux and gone through the portal, you'll be met with another 2 active portals. Now last week we went straight. This week though, we will be going left. Now you'll notice that we're in this new cave system. Here you're going to be greeted with a totally new buff. You can see the pod here asking for a red buff with a red Vex wall being right next to it. Now the goal of this area is actually to find 4 hidden collectibles. To begin that process, you're going to move through the caves, passing another red door and pod until you find a Minotaur. You'll kill it, and that Minotaur will drop a red buff You'll pick up that buff, and right next to it is going to be a narrow passage. This will hold the first hidden collectible. Now, you actually have a proximity sensor on your UI and audio sensors that ping that lets you know you're going in the right direction. So at any point, if you're ever in doubt, guys, just look at that proximity sensor and follow that as a guideline. From here, though, you're going to use that red buff on the first door and then continue through. You're going to find and kill another Minotaur, which will then drop another red buff. You'll then use this new buff on the pod just next to where the Minotaur spawns, which will open up another narrow passage with a second collectible within. Now, once you pick that up, you leave that small room, retrieve the red buff, and then you're going to continue around the corner to the next red door. You'll open this with the buff, and this is where you're going to see a blue pod. Now, to get the blue buff for this pod, you're going to need to enter this room here. This is where another Minotaur will spawn, and that Minotaur will drop the buff. You'll activate the portal with the blue buff, and on the other side will be a Minotaur, this one dropping a yellow buff. Now, just a little further in this room, there will be another collectible and the yellow pod. You'll dunk the buff there to despawn a wall that will bring you back to the main pathway. Now, what you essentially need to do now is retrace your steps to retrieve both of those red buffs. You're going to return through the portals to pick up one, and then you're going to go ahead and place it at this red pod just next to where the yellow pod is. Now, behind this door is yet another red pod and wall. You'll need to retrieve the remaining red buff at the beginning of the area, and once placed on the last red pod, the final wall will drop, and behind it will be the last collectible. Now, chests will then spawn near the beginning portal, which will reward you destabilizing rounds or count as the second secret chest if you haven't done the mission on expert or haven't picked up the quest yet. And that's week 2 of Encore, guys. We got the second Intrinsic, the second Catalyst, as well as picking up the hidden specimen quests. Now, before we talk about Choir of One and Destabilizing Rounds, let's talk about how to finish up NES 008. This is the specimen needed in order to start focusing the trace rifle, the machine gun, and Marty. Now, finishing out this quest is pretty straightforward. First, you'll need to actually go to the helm, you'll pick up the quests, and then you'll need to get 50 Vex CPUs. Now, in order to get these Vex CPUs, you'll need to kill Vex with either melee abilities or finishers. Now, in my opinion, guys, one of the best places to do this is in the Orrery Lost Sector on Nessus. You can run there and just finish Vex one after another. You can also just put on a glaive and use your glaive to get kills, and yes, that will count toward those melee ability kills. Keep in mind, though, it's not a guaranteed drop from the melee ability kills, but it does seem to be a guaranteed drop when getting a finisher on a Vex. Now, upon getting all of your Vex CPUs, you'll then need to complete a battleground flawlessly. Now, don't do the hard version, guys. Just do the normal battleground and just be slow and methodical here, right? Take it step by step. Don't overrush. The goal here is to do the entire activity and don't die. Now, the last part of the quest is to get Void or Arc kills inside of Encore, with bonus progress being granted by volatile or blind kills. Now, you can easily get this all done in a single mission run. I put on Choir of One, went in, got kills, and somewhere around the boss is when I had enough kills. Try to farm as many ads as you can, though. Even if it's like going to some of the chest rooms or some of the secret areas, just farm ads throughout this mission. Now, once you've completed all of that, now you can return back to the helm. You'll complete NES 008, and you'll have 2 things available to you. One being the ability to focus those weapons, that being Marty, the trace rifle, and the machine gun, but you'll also gain access to those suppressing cubes within the Encore mission. So Specimen 8 is definitely worth your time. Now, as for Choir of One and the unlocks that we have this week, guys, this exotic catalyst comes with Destabilizing Rounds, and the Intrinsic unlocks magazine perks. Now, the magazine perk options, choose whatever you want, guys. I actually went with Flared Magwell just for the increase in reload speed. You can also do Alloy Magazine if you actually bring the weapon all the way down to its final shot, but either of those options are just fine. As for Destabilizing Rounds, though, we did do some testing with it just to see if it has a unique take on this trait, but unfortunately, it doesn't. Destabilizing Rounds still has the same internal cooldown as the trait itself has on other weapons, which in my opinion is what's holding this perk back, especially in comparison to Incandescent and Bolt Shots. I do believe that next week, Onslaught is going to be the big one. That's going to be the perk that's going to take Choir of One, which is already a phenomenal weapon as is, and send it to that next level. So guys, that is our guide for this week's Intrinsic as well as our exotic catalyst in NES 008. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.